Let's do this. All right. And chat. Hi, guys. Can someone say hi so we could see if the chat is working? Great. Oh, good. Whew, got nervous. Wonderful. You guys can see well? Great. Thank you, Yalma. Okay, so you could see, see this chat here, babe? But it disappears.
Yeah,
So if you go like this, you can scroll up and down. Ooh. Hi, Raymond. Ooh, we got Silvana from Italy is joining us today. That's exciting. You are very welcome. I'm excited that you reached out so we could get this set up. It is my pleasure, Yalma. You know, it would be really great.
Megan said can't wait to see her husband's bob.
Me too. He's already starting. Are we going to start with long hair? Are we going to start with layered bob? One length bob? Is it going to be a graduated bob? I said a graduated bob. He's not sure if he wants to do that. He's funny. All right, so we're going to give a couple more minutes. It's about 1 o'clock now, and then we'll start. So Raymond, we have not done the challenge yet. We need a day where we have nothing planned during the baby's nap. So sometime next week, I'm mentally preparing myself for cutting blindfolded because it's obviously not the safest thing in the world. But why not? Living life on the edge. Hi, Deja. Welcome. I'm so excited that I figured out how to do the chat. Okay, what time is it? 1:01, right?
102.
Okay. Cool, we can get started. All right, so, babe, I'm gonna start, and then if there are any questions, just read them out. And then keep the position so that I'm in the screen. My head is knocked off, it's all good? Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm excited to show a pixie haircut. If you like pixie, it's such an important look for our clients and is one of the harder haircuts to do. So I will be using a razor and a scissor today. So these are going to be my two tools that I'll be using. My scissor is a Mizutani scissor. I love these scissors because they're super, super skinny, really tiny blade. They're very comfortable for my hand, they're very light, and they stay sharp for a really long time. And then the second tool that I'm going to be using is a feather razor. Feather is the brand of the razor, and it's guarded, so it's kind of nice. You can't really cut yourself unless you are really, really trying. So scissors are, standard way we use a scissor. I want to go over a little bit on how to use a razor. So just basic knowledge, things that you learn from not just Marina's information, but this is just across the board standard. You have the tip or the toe, and then you have the heel of the blade. You are using the tip or the heel depending on which way you are using the razor. So typically, if we're going from center out, we'll use the heel, and if we're going from the center out going towards the right, we'll use the tip or the toe. Whenever we're using a flat point of the blade, so if we're using a skimming technique, which we'll be doing today for one of the sections or a couple of sections, we are going to be using the center of the blade. So we're going to get rid of the toe and the heel, and that is going to be the portion of the blade that we're going to be using. The reason for it is the tension on the outside of the blade is going to be different. Not because the blade itself creates different tension, because obviously it's metal, but because our fingers create different tension on the outside of the knuckle. So the smaller the section, right? The smaller the sections, the more precise your tension is going to be. But the smaller the sections, the more sections you're going to have to do while you're using a razor, and that could be a little bit more difficult, and you might have a little bit of challenges to getting those sections exactly the same. So usually what I recommend is if you put a finger right in the front of the blade and the finger on the outside of the blade, whatever that length is, that's going to be the length of your section. So just a little bit wider than an inch. If you have smaller fingers, your section is going to get a little bit smaller, but never too small, never less than like an inch. So also, how we're placing the blade against the hair is going to dictate how much hair we're going to remove and how quickly that hair is going to be removed. So if we take a section of hair, and we're going to pretend that this is the section of hair, and we place the blade perfectly parallel to the hair. Come closer. Okay, here. So if we place the blade perfectly parallel to the hair, and we slide the blade up and down, no hair is going to come off, right? If I place the blade perpendicular, you guys hear that sound? That is exactly the sound that the hair is going to make. And that's not going to be pretty for the client. They're going to get nervous. So this is going to be really rough on the hair. It's going to remove a lot of hair. And it's probably could be a little bit damaging because it's going to almost like scrape the outside of the hair. So what we want to do is we want to place the blade flat against, and then little by little change the degree of how we're holding that blade against the hair. So you want it to be almost like just a little tiny bit of a drag against that cuticle of the hair. Another way that I know that worked for me, learning on how to hold the blade, is placing the blade against our skin. This is visible, it's okay? So if I place the blade flat, I feel the coldness of the blade, right? So the coldness of this part of the blade. And it feels cold, I don't feel any of the blade touching my skin. Now if I place it too perpendicular, and I go like this, do you guys see how I have scratches on my skin? And I went really gentle, obviously, because my dry skin is enough of it doesn't feel good. Now if I place it just a little tiny bit on an angle, right? So this is flat, a little on an angle, and I go like this, it almost like feels nice. It's almost like scratching a little tiny bit, but it feels really good. So that is the angle that you want to hold it at. And you want to practice, you want to kind of keep going back and forth until you get that stroke. I also put my index finger on the top of the blade, so this way when I go up and down motion, it feels really natural. Also, when I'm holding it, I try not to grab it and really be strong with it or intense. The more intense you are, the more amount of hair that you're going to remove, and that's going to be quite severe. So you want to be a little more gentle, kind of fluid, let that blade do the job instead of the tension or the heaviness of your hand. All right, so that's the basics of the of everything that you need to know about the blade. So let's bring a model, a wonderful model right here. Her name is Emma, and she is from Hair Art. Hair Art is one of the companies that I use for doll heads. So it's Pivot Point and Hair Art. Both of them are really great. They have fantastic hair. The head shape is really nice as well. And these are, especially these are really, really great to color because they're naturally on the lighter side, and you can bleach it and you can line them with color as well. So you can use these doll heads for quite a bit of work. All right, so I have pre-sectioned Emma for us, and my sections are going as follows. As followed, right? That's the proper. All right, so we have a round of the head, which is going to be the highest point of the recession. So I'm going to place the comb against the head shape. Where the comb starts to bevel, that is going to be the center of the round of the head. So whether it's a parietal ridge, whether it's the apex, occipital bone, whatever, or the top of the head, wherever the comb bevels, that is going to be the point of the head that sticks out the farthest from the head. Whether you want to use that as the guide, you want to use above it or below it, that's how you would find where your section should be. So head shapes don't have to be perfect on the client, so you always want to find the head shapes where it sticks out the farthest, because you'll know where that length is going to be the shortest. Right, so here I'm using, this is the round of the head, I'm going just a little tiny bit above it. So that's going to be my sectioning. It's going to be almost horizontal, and then it's going to slope down just a little bit and get to a point of the head where it's going to be just a tiny bit above the occipital bone. So again, occipital bone is the bone structure that sticks out from the back of the head. I'm going to place my comb, flatten it against the flatter points of the head, and that's going to be my sectioning. And I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side and have that meet in the middle to a very soft point. Right? So you kind of want it to come down and then go back up again. So sometimes I find that taking a section that's going to be a little bit more triangular, comes to a point, gives me a long piece through here, right? So if that's what your client wants and you want to see that a little bit more of a severe disconnection, you go ahead. This will give us a little bit more of a blended look. So the look that Emma asked for and the look that we're going for is going to be head hugging underneath, and then we're going to leave the top a little bit on the longer side, so you have a little bit more of a disconnection, and we'll do a little bit of freehand work and a little bit of texturizing to give her versatility on how she wants to wear it. So if she's a funky girl, she wants a lot of movement in her hair, she wants to be able to style it to the side, she wants to wear it up, she wants to wear it parted sort of like a fringe in the front. So we want to make sure that we give a lot of texture and a lot of movement with that hair. All right, so I'm going to do one side with a scissor, and I'm going to do the other side with a feather razor. So this way you guys can see the difference and you know how to use both tools. Originally I decided to do a feather razor, but feather razor is not for beginners. Some, I have a lot of cosmetology school students that are joining for today, so I want to make sure that I give the scissor tutorial as well to kind of cover all the bases. All right, so sections are going to be very similar, whether it's going to be a scissor or a feather razor. Feather razor is going to have a couple different options that we're going to do. For scissor, the options are quite limiting. Scissor is going to do the precision of work that we are looking for whenever we choose to do a scissor work. So at this point, I'm going to have my husband hold the phone just so that you guys can be a little bit closer. He is still looking at the camera, so if you guys are, or at the phone, so if you have any questions, write down the questions at any point, and then this way, I will go ahead and answer any questions during the class. At the end of the class, I am going to be doing a Q&A, so any questions that you might have at the end of the class, please feel free to ask if it doesn't concern this haircut. And then we're also going to be doing a head sheet as well during the haircut. So as I go, I'm gonna write down things right on there. Okay, so let's discuss sectioning. So to do a pixie, right? What's a pixie haircut? Pixie is just a name for a technique, right? For an actual haircut. A technique is going to describe the haircut as we're going ahead. So if she wants it pretty head hugging on the side, that means the shape that I want to create is going to have to be somewhere around here. So the decision that you have to make will be depending on how much length you want to save on the top and how much length you want to save on the bottom of your whole entire section. That will determine what pattern you want to take. So for example, if you want the underneath to be really short, so this area to be really short, and then every length on top to get longer and longer and longer and be pretty heavy to almost look like a bob, your sections are going to be horizontal with a slight diagonal. Now, if you want your sections, or if you want the end result to be really head hugging, almost like my haircut in here, especially when it was freshly cut, pre-quarantine haircut, then you're going to take vertical sections. The reason for it is it's much easier to control the shape that you're going to create from the bottom of your section and the bottom of natural hairline to the top if you're holding your fingers vertically. Because at this point, I'm holding the whole entire shape within my fingers. So I could easily dictate what that shape is going to look like with just moving my fingers all around. Now, it's easier to maintain the weight of the section and get this section to look really heavy if I take horizontal sections. Because at this point, I'm going to be holding more of the sectioning and more of the shape going from right to left, which means I don't have to worry so much of up and down. I can control my overall shape going this way easier by holding sections horizontal. So now, if my decision was I want this to be really flat, really head hugging, I'm going to hold my fingers vertically. If I want her to have a little bit more heaviness on the top and not so head hugging, I'm going to hold my fingers this way. Heavier here and the heaviest here. So I'm going to be somewhere in the middle. The length I'm looking for is softness around the front hairline, and then when I get to behind the ear, I want it to be a little bit more head hugging and very clean around the hairline. So my first section is going to be following the natural hairline. So on the doll head, her sectioning or hairline is a little wonky, right? So we have a little bit of this weirdness happening in here. On the climb, your first section would be right here. On a doll head, we have to take a slightly smaller section to make sure that there's no over direction that's happening right in the front hairline. I'm going to take my first section, nice and skinny. Comb that hair out of the way. If you want to clip it, go ahead. Sometimes it helps to put your finger right against the scalp, and then the warmth from your finger is going to heat up the hair and it's going to stay. So doll heads don't have heat coming from the scalp, so that the hair doesn't stay as easily. So I'm going to have you come a little bit over that way, like that. All right, so first we're going to discuss on how to hold your fingers. So I'm going to place my knuckle and my fingertips flat against the head. From this point, I'm going to come out, go to about here, keeping my fingers pretty much parallel to what the flattest point of the head was. And I'm going to cut that line to mirror my fingers. So again, place my fingers flat against the flattest point of the head, which is going to be right here, and then bring the fingers straight out from where it grows and cut a line parallel to that. When I drop this section, do you guys see how much movement I left around the, so come a little bit closer to here, just so that you could see that movement. Good. Do you guys see how much length I left here and how much length I left here? Now, if I like that, I can go ahead and continue using the same cutting line. Now, I feel like she's a little long. I also feel like she's long everywhere, but I also think this needs to be tighter in here. So I want that shape to sit a little bit more graduated. So I'm going to come back, come stand from the front again. So now instead of placing my fingers flat against the head, right, so I'm going to hold it. I'm going to keep my knuckles where they are. I'm going to come out with my fingertips just a little bit. Do you guys see how there's gappage between the scalp and my fingers now where my fingertips are, but my knuckles are still flat against the head shape? Now that is going to be much more of a graduated shape. So look at the difference. I'm barely touching any of the length on the top. Come around so you can see what I'm cutting. I barely cut anything through the top of that section, but once I get to the bottom of that section, I'm cutting off a little bit more. So now that shape is going to sit in a little bit tighter on the bottom and still looser on the top. So I'm happy with that. It's a graduated shape, but if I push this forward, she's still got movement and texture. So now if I'm happy with this length, I'm going to continue taking diagonal sections that are matching up to the previous section that I created. And I'm going to do the same thing. So now this is going to be called elevation. So elevation is where we bring hair away from a natural fall. If this is considered no elevation, lifting hair is creating elevation. And my finger angle is showing that I'm cutting the top of this section. I'm going to move a little tiny bit this way. And the finger angle is showing that the length on the top is going to be longer than the length that's between my fingers. Sorry, between my knuckles. So what is a graduated shape? Graduated shape is when your external length, so the length that's closer to the outside, is shorter and it's gradually getting longer. Now we could see the silhouette, right? We could see the expanded shape, how this is longer in here and it's going to be heavier, and this is going to be skinnier and leaner to the head. So I'm going to stand in the front. I'm going to check to make sure that I'm liking this before I go ahead. So if you stand right in the front, you could see the expanded shape like that. Perfect. Right, so if I'm happy, I could go ahead and continue. So I'm going to take a diagonal section, come closer this way. Take a diagonal section. Clip that, we'll comb that out of the way. Now the next thing that we're going to discuss is going to be over direction. So over direction is moving hair away from where it grows on the head. So when we're talking about over direction, we need to always pay attention to where the hair grows from the scalp. What do we want to do to that hair? Do we want every single hair when we're cutting it to be exactly the same length? Then we're going to cut it exactly where it grows on the head. Now, if I want to preserve the length, I'm going to move that hair. If I want to cut it shorter, I'm going to move that hair away from where it grows. So the next thing we need to discuss, right, so in our consultation, my model said that the length in the back, she wants it to be about the same as the length in the front. So if she wants to be about the same all the way throughout the haircut, from front to back, right? So we're not talking about from bottom to top, we're talking about from front to back. That means I need to work on base. I need to pay attention to where hair grows from on the head and cut it very close to exactly where it grows, which means I'm going to take a section and I'm always going to be bringing hair to exactly where that hair grows from the head, and I'm going to constantly move with my sections. So that was my section 3. I'm going to take the next section, section 4. I'm going to comb that out of the way. I'm going to place the comb, so I switched how I'm holding the comb. I'm going to push all that hair to exactly where on base for that section number 4 is. I'm going to bring out the section. You guys see how there is no drag of the section. No, come from the front and then maybe go a little bit higher up, but try to stand as if you're parallel to the hair. Yes, perfect. So do you guys see how there's no drag on the section that I'm about to cut? There is over direction happening to the first couple of sections. Now if I move this forward, now I'm dragging that hair forward. If I move it back, now I'm dragging that hair back. So you want to try to keep it as close to on base as possible. So again, I'm going to place the comb into the hair, bring it out to what I think on base is, hold it. I'm going to comb it from the opposite side, place my fingers in, get my finger angle, and now cut right to the guide that I see between my fingers. Now, if we stay perfectly on base with the section that we're about to cut, then technically the back is going to be just a little bit shorter because we're using the guide that we already cut, we're moving it. By the time we move it, it's going to be a little bit shorter because it has longer distance to travel. So when we're working on base, we want to lean towards the over direction towards the front and not the actual perfect base. So if you're going to have a tendency to pull hair, have a little bit more tendency to pull hair forward, right? So if this is on base in here, I'm going to have a tendency to push it just a little tiny bit forward, almost towards the front of the section, because that little tiny bit of over direction is going to keep that hair identical length. Now, if I aim to bring on base for the back of the section, that means I'm going to gradually get shorter. That means the length in the back is going to be shorter than the length in the front. So be careful with that. Switch the comb, place the comb right against the hair. I'm going to watch that the teeth are outlining the section, the left side of the sectioning. Bring the hair to the same elevation where I've been cutting. Place the comb on the opposite side. Careful not to move my fingers too far. Knuckles are staying against the head. Fingertips farther out. And make sure that I see my guide very clear before I continue to cut. See your guide, and then go ahead, cut to the guide. Since my fingers can't hold the whole entire section from the top to the bottom and not have any hair bunch up between my knuckles, I have to recomb that section. So anytime I recomb, all I'm doing is just extending the line that I created from the top. So stay. So when I bring this section out, it is one solid line that goes all the way from the bottom all the way to the top of the line, even though I stopped cutting right over here and then started again. So that's very careful not to change how you're holding fingers against the head. All right, so and there's two hairs right here. So now we're approaching the area that where our sectioning is going to get much longer, right? So it's double the length. So what I'm doing here is not going to be the same exact thing as what I was doing here, right? So if this is the lowest point from this section, this length here on the bottom is not going to be the same length that is going to be on the bottom of this section. So if my knuckles were touching down here, right, all the way to here, I want to make sure that my knuckles are not touching here, because if my knuckles are touching, that means I can't get any shorter. That means my length on the top is going to be the same as what I've been doing, but my knuckles are going to be slightly away from the head and then I'm gonna get smaller, and, or not smaller, shorter and tighter to the head, and my knuckles are only going to touch all the way on the bottom of that hairline. So let's show you how that works. Here's my first section going all the way through. Take a skinny section. Comb that hair out of the way. Checking where my on base is. Come out. Find my guide. Now I want you to stand right in front of me. Actually, why don't we try this? Let's stand in front so you could see my finger angle this way. And I'm gonna squat down and get sort of comfortable here. Right, so do you guys see how my knuckles are no longer touching here? I have a little bit of gappage, but now the length that I'm leaving on the head is getting shorter and shorter, right? So the longest, and it's gradually getting shorter, the closer to the nape that I'm getting. Now down here, my knuckle is now against, right against her neck. Try to keep your fingers as still as possible while you're cutting. And then the line you want to create needs to be as solid and as fluid as you can get it to look. Right, so next section. Parallel to the previous. I'm going to clip this out of the way so you guys can see a little bit better. Now I'm going to tilt her head down just a little bit to make sure that I'm comfortable. I'm going to have you right over here just so I can fit. So place the comb from the back or from the front, push the hair towards you, and then comb back towards the front so that you're staying on base. Elevation is still the same. So elevation is however you hold your fingers for your first section is how you're holding it for the rest. And then continue without changing your finger angle, keeping it as fluid as possible all the way till you get to the bottom hairline. I have one more section that I'm going to work exactly the same. Then I'm going to change my approach, and instead of staying on base and over directing without creating much of an over direction, I'm going to start over directing hair towards the previous section. So even though she told me, Marina, I want my length all the way through to be pretty head hugging. I don't want the length in the front to be shorter. I don't want the length in the back to be shorter. I know that most clients have cowlicks. So, and to save the length in the back, I need to create a little bit of a direction so those cowlicks are not popping up and not going a little crazy. All right, so that was my last section. So the only thing that's going to change, my hand position is going to be the same. My finger angle is going to be the same. My elevation is going to be the same. The only thing that's going to change is where I'm combing hair before I cut it. So if I held my hair, the new section, here before, let's stand right here, please. Maybe a little bit higher so you can see it in front of my fingers. So if this was my over direction, how I held them before, I'm going to push that hair forward just a little bit. So just that a little tiny bit of movement in over direction forward is going to preserve a little bit more length in here, and the length is gradually going to get longer and longer. So the reason why I chose to do so at this point of the head is this is where the round of the head starts to happen, right? So we're working about mastoid process bone, which is right where the area that I'm about to cut. And these are the areas where cowlicks are starting to happen, right? So we need to preserve a little bit of length right in these areas to make sure that we have a feminine shape and a fluid shape. So it's not about the length that we are leaving on the head. It's about the length that's going to look like when the haircut is done, right? So if someone has a flat spot in here, that means the length needs to travel farther, or the length needs to be longer so it could travel farther to create that shape. So if someone has a cowlick, the same thing happens. Unless you straighten that hair, it's not going to appear nearly as long unless client is always going to be blow drying it and making it straight. So if a cowlick is going to make the appearance of the hair shorter, you need to be aware of what's happening at that scalp, right? So instead of pushing the hair back, I'm now going to place the comb and push it forward. So careful not to over-direct too far towards the front, because that length needs to get gradually longer. Otherwise it's going to look like a weight spot or a weight point. And then the rest of the section is staying the same. Right, so I'm working on base for the whole entire section until I get to the round of the head, right to occipital bone. From this point, I over-direct just a little tiny bit. And you guys can tell how this hair is kind of falling right on base, and this kind of drags forward. So that's where I'm going to create a little tiny bit more of that over-direction. All right, so I'm going to continue working in the same exact manner until I get to the middle of the head. So how I'm taking my sections is staying exactly the same. How I started it, all it is I'm just going to continue. Now sections are just the gas that you put in the car to get you to the end result. How you take your sections don't really matter. Right? You could take any sections that you want. It just makes it easier to work in a certain manner. So for me, I found that it's much easier when I'm creating shapes like these, very head-hugging shapes, to take a slight diagonal section that is mirroring more so the front hairline and staying quite vertical. Now for you, if you feel like taking a slightly more diagonal section makes life easier, then go ahead. As long as your sections are staying clean and you're following what you've been doing, that's all that matters. Right? So as long as your elevation over direction and your cutting line are fluid and clean, then sections are just there to help you and to guide you. Right, and I have one more section after this one. And then I'm going to go ahead and do a razor on the opposite side. So I'm going to do a couple of different options. You don't have to make this haircut look identical on the right side as the left side. I'd rather show you guys a couple of different techniques on what I like to do. And this way you can learn a little bit more. And then in the end, if you like the scissor part better, you could always make your razor side look similar to the scissor. So when do we use a scissor and when do we choose a feather razor? Well, it depends on how much texture you want to see in the hair, right? So if you want someone to be perfect and precise, you're going to use a scissor. If someone's texture is really straight and they want to see movement in the hair, you might need to use a razor to kind of expose some of the natural texture and create more movement. All right, so before we move on to the razor, let's cross-check. So the easiest way to cross-check is taking the opposite section than what we used for our cutting. So if we took a vertical section or diagonal vertical, taking a diagonal horizontal would be the easiest way to check my section 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and how it looks on the head. So if I take a section mirroring what I have here, and I bring it out to the same elevation as how I cut it, and the same over direction. Then the cutting line that I see, between my fingers is going to tell me what my section 1 looks like in comparison to section 2, to comparison to section 3. I brought it a little too high. Let's bring this a little bit lower so you guys can see my cutting line a little better. How's that? It's visible? Okay. So here's my section 1, section 2, section 3, section 4. So it looks pretty good. It looks like it's even. Looks like the length are very similar. Now, if I brought it to the wrong spot to cross-check, right? Let's say I brought it way too high and I cross-checked it here, right? You still got the gist that it is looking pretty round, but look how much harder it is to see your cutting line, right? It doesn't look as strong. And the same thing is if I bring it too low. If I bring it too low, it's still not as pretty. So it's very important to cross-check your haircuts at the same elevation and same over direction, right? So that looks pretty good. So I know if I cross-check the top of that section, most likely the rest of the sectioning is going to be clean. But obviously, if you're just starting out, you always want to be safe than sorry. Take the middle of that section, cross-check the same exact way. Take the bottom of that section, and then cross-check it the same exact way. Where's this one little hair that I see happening? Okay, it's from the top. And the same thing all throughout. So you want to get all the way throughout that sectioning and then cross-check it going all the way through. So you want to see a crisp, strong line when you're using a scissor. Now, don't look for the same guide when you're using a feather razor, because feather razor is not meant to be cut to precision, right? Okay, so let's move on to the razor side. Let me put my razor hat on. Switching over from one tool to another. I must have to take a little breather. I want to make sure that I'm working at an eyesight, and I want to be really comfortable. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys a couple of different ways. So I usually like to do the front hairline, skimming technique, and then the rest, I take smaller sections and I glide through the hair, and I keep my blade either open or closed depending on how I want my end result to look. So skimming technique, here it is. We're going to take a section wide enough where I'm using the whole entire blade minus the tip and minus the heel, or the toe and the heel. So I'm going to clip that out of the way, make sure that I'm staying really clean. I'm going to have you stand right in front of my section, right here. Okay, so skimming technique removes weight and length at the same time and creates a graduated shape. So this is perfect when you are trying to achieve a slight graduated shape or a bob. Don't get any ideas, Rob. You can't use a razor when we are doing the challenge of who can cut a better bob. All right, so I'm gonna hold my fingers exactly where I want my overall length to be. So let's hold it a little bit lower. Let's leave a little bit more softness on this side. So let's hold our fingers just above the earlobe. So right over here. My elevation is going to be, if this is 0 elevation, I'm going to lift it up and hold it just a little bit off of the head. I'm going to stand directly in front of my section. I'm going to comb it as many times as I need to make sure all of the grains of the hair going in the same exact direction. Here I am. Hold it between my fingers. If I want the length in the back to be the same as the front, I'm going to hold my fingers parallel to my sectioning. If I want my length to be longer, I'm going to hold my fingers diagonal. This is my end result, right? This is where I want to leave my length to be. I'm going to place my razor 2 inches above, which means I'm going to start removing weight from this point on the head. So I'm going to start here, and one move, I'm going to go all the way down to my fingers. I'm going to come back up and do that again. Once I do that a couple of times, I'm going to remove weight from the hair. Now my strokes are going to get smaller and smaller and smaller until I have almost no weight left in the section. Now I could do small little stroke, keep my blade closed to remove the rest of the length. So hold it. Blade goes flat against the hair. Position just a tiny bit of teeth towards the hair, 2 inches above. Just a little bit of weight removal. I'm going to come back and do that again. Do you see how gradual the amount of weight is being removed? Very slow, very steady. So all I did is I just removed that weight from that section. Now my strokes are going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. When I barely holding any hair, my strokes are going to get really small until I remove that length. So now if we check what her profile looks like, here's the graduated shape. Right, so I could remove a couple of these hairs in here. The length on top is longer, the length on the bottom is shorter. Very similar to what we created here, obviously much longer. Same thing as what we created on this side, short to long, but much softer, right? And now she could wear this pushing forward and she has all that texture. So now we can leave this and we can continue taking the rest shorter so that it's a symmetric haircut. Or I could show you guys another way to remove weight and length at the same time. But this, the second way, will be a little bit more, less of a weight removal. So it will be a little more of a precision. So we're going to take diagonal section, similar to what we did on the opposite side. I'm going to clip that out of the way. I'm going to take some of the section that are already cut. I'm going to hold my fingers to similar graduation of what I did on the other side. I'm just going to go a little bit longer. Right, so I'm creating graduated shape. I'm going to place the blade on top of the section. Teeth are going to position towards the hair, right? So careful not to go too severe. Flat, just a little bit. And then how open you hold your blade is going to create more movement or less movement. So let's say I want the top of the section to be really soft and then the bottom of the section to be stronger. I'm going to change my blade to be smaller, right? So negative space. Whatever I have cut here is exactly what is left on the hair. So the bottom of the section is much stronger and this is much softer, right? So I'm going to go ahead and remove that heaviness in here to make it a little more even, right? So end result is similar to what we did on the opposite side with the scissor, except now we have much more softness in here. So this is a good way to determine whether this will be working better for your client or the other side. So my favorite reason to use a razor, if someone doesn't want to look like they just got a haircut, use a feather razor. It's going to give you more of a softer end result. It's going to give you more texture. She's going to look a little bit more shaggier, and that's what your client wants. Then you could do exactly the same thing with a scissor as you do with a razor without giving her that perfect haircut. Now here's my guide. Make sure you find it in front of your fingers. I'm going to keep my blade a little bit more on the open side. Open meaning how much movement I'm creating with the blade. So how much in and out I'm going. So how much zigzag I'm creating. Making sure my fingers are not sliding the lower I go on the head. Let's switch around. Let's go from here and then you stand in front. Tell me if this angle is not good. So now if you want to create almost blunt and almost precise look, you could keep your blade very closed. So you could do the same exact thing. Right, here's my guide, and I'm going to keep my blade really closed. And look at the cutting line that I created. Right, that looks like a serrated, looks like I cut it blunt with a scissor and then went ahead and point cut into it. So really soft. So your choice of what you want to create, depending on how you use that blade. So the cutting line that I'm using is mirroring the cutting line that I used on the opposite side. My length is just a little bit longer. Overall length is a little bit longer, but the rest is about the same. Which means my knuckles are closer to the head. I'm sorry, my knuckles are farther away and my fingertips are closer to the head. So in the end, the graduated shape is going to be longer here and then gradually getting tighter and tighter to the head. Now if someone wants more softness in here, you can keep your fingers a little more on the flatter side. The farther your fingertips are, the more length you're going to create in here, or the more length you're going to leave. The tighter you go, the heavier you go this way, that's going to dictate how much length you're leaving on the head. My sections are going to mirror what I've been doing. If you are just starting out using a feather razor, take really, really small sections. It is so satisfying to use a feather razor. It glides through the hair. It immediately looks really pretty and soft. But if your sections are a little bit on the wider side, then it doesn't cut like butter. It kind of grabs on the hair, kind of pulls on the hair. It's uncomfortable for the client, and you can't get your creative juices going if you have to fight the hair. Okay. Any questions? Wow. It must be.
A lot of love.
That's fantastic. That's all that matters. It's nice to feel loved. Continue. So keeping my sections very close to on base, which means wherever hair grows from, I try to keep that hair very close to that area. And then all the way down until I reach my hairline. All right, so I have one more section.
Deja would like to know, when taking the section, how small should it be?
So great question, Deja. So usually the density and the natural texture, client's natural texture, is going to dictate how skinny or how thick that section needs to be. Whenever we're working, you always want to be able to see your guide through the section, right? So when I take that section, I want to make sure that I see the guide very clear. That means my section is thin enough. Now you want to always have enough hair between your fingers that you feel the tension, right? And you have control of your section. If you don't have control of your section, most likely you're going to recut the section that you already cut. So make sure that your section is not too thin. So it's always going to change depending on your client. Ballpark, somewhere around 1/2 inch. That's when you are not using the skimming technique. When you're using a skimming technique, your section is always going to be the width of the blade minus the toe and heel.
Haley would like to know if that is with scissors too, or just the feather razor.
Haley, that would be for both scissors and the razor. With razor, you can get away with slightly thicker section because you are not looking for perfection, right? We're not looking for that perfect line, but you still want to be able to see your guide through. So whenever I work with a scissor, my sections are always paper thin. When I'm using with razor, I always go a little tiny bit wider.
And Yalma would like to know, are we keeping the same over direction used in the other side with the scissors?
Yes, good question. So here's my so that was my last section that I created over direction on base. With this section, I'm going to drag that hair just a tiny bit forward. So come from the top so that you could see the drag of the hair. So if this is where I was cutting prior, this is where I'm going to be. And the reason why I chose this area is where the round of the head starts to happen, right? So flat, round, and you want to be right at the round of the head. So also, if you're using a scissor on both sides and you're keeping your sections exactly consistent, then you want to count your section. So my section 4 was right here, section 5, section 6. I did the same thing on the opposite side. So when you're using a razor on one side and a scissor on the other side, obviously your sections are not going to match up perfectly, but that's a good way to keep yourself in check. So let's say on section 7 or section 8, whatever, how many sections it takes you to get to this point, you started to over direct, you're going to do the same thing on the opposite side. So this way you can kind of keep track where you are, and it'll help you remember where you started to over direct. Obviously head shape is going to dictate when you should start over directing, but especially if you're working on a doll head, doll heads have pretty even head shapes. So I always, whenever I teach classes, we always count sections. Always count and always remember where our over direction started and what our finger angle was and how it changed throughout the section.
And then Deja would also like to know, would you do the same with the razor with curly hair?
Deja, great question. So that will depend on how curly the natural texture is. So for example, if someone has really strong curl pattern and you keep your blade open, right? So you kind of go like this, you're going to release a lot of weight from that hair, and most likely that hair is either going to get really curly or it's going to get frizzy. On really short hair, right, you're kind of cutting above the curl pattern, so above the C, the first bend in the hair, and you're most likely going to remove the curl totally, and it's going to look more like a little wave. So I use a razor on curly hair. I probably would not use a razor on such short hair. That's personal opinion or personal preference. Just because I don't feel comfortable removing weight from hair that already does not have much weight left in it at this length. So right in here, right, it's really hard for me to hold that hair. So instead of, right, so it's kind of about to fall off out of my fingers. So instead, I'm gonna cut within my fingers. So I'm gonna have you come from the opposite side, from here. And instead, I'm gonna do this little motion. So I'm kind of scratching the inside of my middle finger. And this way I can create the shape that I wanna see, but keep the end result pretty soft, right? So overall shape, right? If we kind of stand back and look directly, right? So from here, so don't pay attention to the lengths of being off, right? The right side is shorter than the left side. But if we're looking at the silhouette, right? How this line and this line looks, it looks very similar. What's this one little hair that's bothering me? That's how we pull hair on clients also. Right? So this line and this line is very similar, which means my graduation was very similar. This length is obviously longer and much softer, where this looks much more blunt. So on the doll head, you guys can tell that my left side looks so much softer and so much prettier, right? Because it doesn't stick out as much. It has a little bit more jaggedness to the edge. This is kind of a little more on the pokier side. And I'll show you how to blow dry the doll head to make her look good. Okay, so now we finished this part. Let's go ahead and do the head sheet while you guys, so that it's fresh.
Afsani would like to know if you could use the same technique with a men's cut.
Yeah, absolutely. This is exactly what I do for my round graduations. Absolutely. So you can go ahead. You can. Controversial questions are okay as well.
Bespoke was asking that they were told in school not to use a razor on curly hair. Do you agree?
So I agree if the curly hair is an extreme case, right? Really tight curl, really frizzy texture. If someone has a natural wave, then that's okay. So I agree to disagree. If the razor is used properly, totally fine. This metal inside of the blade, right, is not any different than metal here. it's how you use the blade, right? So it's not the metal, it's me who's using this blade. So if I use it properly and I use it carefully and there's plenty of moisture and product in the hair that is going to keep the hair integrity well, then that's okay to do so. Trying to not get my face right in front of the camera. All right, so let's talk about sectioning. So right in here, I have black line that is separating the three sections that we have. So section 1 is what we just finished. So black solid line is going to be the major sectioning. A black arrow is going to be our subsections. Right? So that's what they look like, right? Diagonal sectioning, kind of mirroring each other. Now the next one is going to be a red line. So red line in the center is going to be our over direction. So where do we keep our fingers and how do we cut this so that we can remember it next time, right? So do we push the hair towards the front? Do we push the hair towards the back? Or do we stay on base? So we're gonna show that we stayed on base by showing little arrows right within these sections. And that's going to show me that I moved each section towards the back of that section. Now what changed in the back of the head is it changed the over direction. So my arrow is gonna go right on the opposite side. Do you want your arms a little break?
I'm good.
You sure? Good job. My hubby has been holding the phone the whole entire time for 61 minutes. That's his upper body workout. Right, so we have the arrow going the opposite direction. The last thing that we need to show is we need to show a cutting line and we need to show how we left the hair on the head. So my blue line is going to show how I held my fingers. So we're gonna go right ahead and do a blue solid line, right? And that's how I held my fingers when I was cutting. The length on the top is longer and the length on the bottom is shorter. And the red arrow on the outside of the head is going to be our elevation. So this is how I held the hair. If this is parallel to the floor, I held it just a little below, and the longer arrow through here is also showing that the length on the top of my section is longer than underneath. Здравствуйте, Игорь. Okay, so let's go ahead and drop the second section. I'm going to comb this down. Spray her down to make sure that she's got enough moisture in the hair so the hair is not dry and I could see control that or the texture that I'm creating. I have control of the hair. I try not to have the hair soaking wet, just kind of moisturized enough so it's not poking out. All right, so that should be good. Now I'm going to comb it at a natural fall.
Petya asked earlier if this is something you'd be able to go back to and watch another time.
Yes, absolutely. I'll be saving it on the live, on the YouTube live, and you guys can watch it as many times as you want at any point of the day. Okay, so the next step is I'm going to see where the hair separates. There are any natural calyx that's pushing the hair. So if you guys is really separating, everyone's good, right? I just got a phone call. Okay, so right, everything is great. There's no separation, which means I'm going to separate right from the back of the ear. I take a vertical section, push the hair forward, and let that hair fall to the back. So the reason why I wanted to play with the hair before I section, there are any hair patterns or growths that are dictating hair going one way or the other. I want to always listen to that, right? So if I go like this and that hair definitely wants to go back, then I might take my sections a little bit farther forward, or a little farther back. That will dictate on what I should do with my sectioning, because I don't want to ever cut hair and push it to go one way and naturally it wants to go somewhere else. Right, so right to the back of the ear. All right, so now I have section 2. I'm going to tighten out the doll head, make sure that she's not moving. I'm sorry, Emma, you're not a doll head, you're a client, you're a model. All right, so a couple of different ways that I could go ahead about this haircut. I can first remove the length, and then I can go ahead and remove the weight from the section, or I could go ahead and do the same by removing weight and length together. Length first, I could take a horizontal section, put that out of the way. So I'm going to go with my longer side guide. So this way, because I think this looks pretty, and I'm going to want to blow dry this side and sort of show the end result on this side instead of the scissors. So which means I'm going to use the guide that I see from underneath. Comb this right on my fingers. Here's my guide. I'm going to watch the guide slide through my fingers, and when I see it, I'm going to go ahead and go 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch past the guide. So I want to have a really soft disconnection. So I'm going to be right here. I'm going to place the blade where the teeth are going towards the hair. So I'm going to be about 3/4 of an inch. And I could keep my blade pretty closed to create a slight disconnection. Now I'm going to take that same section, hold it, place the blade flat, lift the left side, and then go ahead and do some surface grazing, which is going to remove the weight of the section. So it's kind of a two-step process. Now you could do the same thing by removing the weight first and then the length after. So what are the benefits of that? So if you go ahead, remove the length first, with each section that you take, you can see your guide pretty clear on the underneath. If you remove the weight, can you guys see my guide? It's there, but it's not as easy to see. So sometimes it's just a little bit easier to go ahead, remove the length first, and then go ahead and remove the weight afterwards. So I'm going to show you how I would go about if I wanted to remove weight from the section first. So surface grazing. Recomb it. Remove the weight. So the benefit of removing weight first, removing length is really, really easy, right? Because it's just barely any hair left, and it creates this sort of serrated, very soft outline.
Patya would like to know if you're replacing the blade between every cut.
So it depends. Yes, always between each haircut, always a brand new blade for a new client. Sometimes even more than one blade. So sometimes if someone has really thick hair, you might need to use 2 blades per haircut. All right, so I'm going to lower this a little tiny bit so it's easier for me to see. So hold it. Here's my guide. Surface grazing first. And I can tell where it's heavy Now if my doll head had ton and ton of hair, then I can go ahead and do more of this and keep my blade even more open. Right, because I want this to, even though I have soft disconnection, when it drops, I want it to melt and blend in, right? So it's not going to blend with the shorter side as much, but look how pretty it looks on this side, right? It's almost blending together perfectly. All right, so continue. You can have a client look up just a little bit to make it easier. Small sections. Clip hair out of the way. Now how I'm holding my fingers are parallel to the sectioning that I have hit here, which means I'm creating more over direction and more length on the outside of this section, which means I'm going to create more of this connection towards the front. So here's my guide. Keep removing that weight from the section. And then all the way through. Now I'm going to come back. Now I'm keeping my blade more and more open the higher I go, because I want lots of volume on the top. And then my elevation is slightly changing. So with each section, I'm bringing hair higher and higher and higher. Right, because what would happen if I kept my elevation exactly the same? I would have almost like a textured heavy bob on top. So I want to make sure that I'm not creating much more length on the top so it doesn't sit too heavy. Right, you guys see sometimes haircuts, or we've all done them, where it kind of looks like a little mushroom on the top of the head, and then you have to go ahead and texturize so much out of that hair to make it blend. So lift the client's head so that it's easier for you. Find your guide, here it is. Let your fingers slide. Lots of weight removal. I could go a little bit closer to the head if I need to really get that section to look skinny. Not see-through, you want to make sure that the integrity of the hair is staying healthy. And then all the way. So right over here, she's really, really thick. So that's where her hair has been implanted. So I want to make sure that I get rid of that. And I'm almost like naturally fixing how her patterns and growth patterns are to give her a perfect, perfect surface. All right, and now I can go ahead and remove that length. Whenever we're using a razor, you always want it to hit your fingers on the way in, right? So that's how I know that my ending result and the longest length is going to be the same. Always cross-check the shape. Always want to make sure that you're looking for the balance. So careful not to pay attention to the balance. The imbalance is if you have asymmetrical haircut, right? That we're going to assess afterwards. And the last section. So I don't need much here. That's pretty see-through already. So I'm going to need a little tiny bit more on the top. So you could see the density. Look how skinny that is. I'm not touching that. Just a little bit more. I'll remove it right in that spot. Okay. Let's remove length. Okay, so that's section 3. We remove weight and length. Now let's cross-check it and give it a little tiny bit more softness.
Bespoke would like to know,
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a few stylists on Instagram using a straight blade rather than a guarded feather razor. Is that a preference reason or gives a different look?
Great question. So straight blade is going to be almost like between your feather razor and the scissor. You could still create a serrated or a blunt edge. This gives you a little bit more drag onto the hair. So normally you would get a little more texture with this blade than you would with a straight blade. But straight blade, you can cut yourself with it. So I am a wussy when it comes to straight blade. And I find that I could get as much texture, as little amount of texture with this blade. So it's definitely a preference. But I think it's nice to know how to use every tool. I have a straight blade that I brought home from the salon, and that is my quarantine homework, is to learn how to use it well. I have not picked it up, it's still in the bag. Okay, so here is my cross check. Right, so here's the length underneath. Right, so here's the length underneath, and here's the length that I cut on the top. Right, so it's a little tiny bit longer right over here. So I'm going to go through and cross check it. Whenever I see any blunt lines, I'm going to remove it, right? So the texture looks pretty good. The length on top looks pretty good. Maybe a little heavy right over here. So I'm going to do a little peeling motion and get that to look better. Take another vertical section. So that's my cross check, right? The opposite sectioning. A little tiny bit long right in this spot. And the rest looks good. So careful not to look for perfection, right? If you have like random stragglers sticking out, obviously cut them. But careful not to look for a perfect blunt line, because if you change the ending of the hair, how you used and how you cut it, then you are changing the fact that you use the feather razor. So try not to get it to look like a scissor. Right, and then when I'm cross-checking, I'm making sure that I'm bringing everything back and not following the head shape, right? Because that's where I stood when I was cutting it. Okay, so that's good. I'm now going to cross-check the other side. I can do it quickly. Okay. All right, so now section number 3. Take a section that follows the underneath. All right, so we had a section that was pretty horizontal. Take a section. Keep your client's head nice and straight. And I'm going to remove the hair from the back, right? So I want to find a guide, because I can't use the guide from underneath because it's way shorter. So I want to use the guide that I have coming from the back, right? So here's my longest piece. Since the hair was over directed all the way back, I preserved that length, right? So now it's my choice to decide how long I want that front to be. If I use the longest piece of that section from the back, then my length is going to be this long. If I go ahead and use this piece of hair and recut this portion of this section, then I'm going to be much shorter, right? So that is up to you on what length you want to keep. So I'm going to be really open when I'm doing this, because this is the disconnection that's going to hang over your underneath. This is where it's going to look, instead of look like a bowl cut, it's going to look like a beautiful feathery textured haircut. Right, so keeping my blade really, really open. I'm going about 2 inches above my fingers, right? So that's how much movement I created. And the same thing that's happening, so negative, so it's the opposite on the hair, right? Look how much movement I created. I'm going to do the same thing. horizontal section, slightly higher elevation. Use the same guide from underneath, right? So there's my length. Find the longest piece. Slide your fingers past the longest piece. So this way you have room to move that blade in and out about 2 inches. Slightly higher elevation, so careful not to drag hair from to the underneath section and all the way through. Now if you want the length on the front to be longer than what it is now, you can position your fingers going in this way, right? So how your end result, right? Whatever the cutting line you want to see, if you want the length to be longer, you can move your knuckles to be farther away from the head, and that's going to preserve the length. You could also over direct hair slightly back, but careful not to recut too much of that length in the back, because that's the length that you already created, and you don't want to connect this area in here. And the last section on this side, I'm going to do the same thing. Lift the lower a tiny bit higher. Here's my guide. Let my fingers slide through the guide. Find the guide in front of my fingers. 2 inches above, slightly higher elevation, all the way through. So now I'm going to go ahead and cross-check by taking a vertical section, and then here's my cutting line. Looks pretty good. Same elevation, same over direction. Only remove if you see any random hair sticking out. If you see pretty texture, leave it alone. Try not to be too OCD about it. Right, that was my biggest issue, because I learned how to use a scissor first. So for me, a razor, I felt like I'm leaving everything so sloppy and so messy. So that was really hard for me to kind of leave it as is. Now what I can do is I would like to show you guys how to do this side with a scissor. So let's keep it this way. I'm gonna grab my scissor. I can't believe most of the people are staying on throughout this whole haircut. Good for you guys. Thank you so much. 80 minutes is a long haircut to watch. Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna actually go this way. All right, so I'm gonna take mohawk section, so center part. Comb the hair all the way forward just to make my life easier. And then section, and then comb the hair away. So that's going to be my middle section, go right in front. I'm going to lift this section up. Now the same thing, our first section here, my decision was which hair do I want to use for the length, right? So instead of using the hair that goes from here, I used the hair that was just a little tiny bit behind the round of the head. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Instead of using the longest piece that I cut, which was right there, I'm going to go from this point, right, and I'll go ahead and cut this angle in here. Now if I want the length in the front to be longer, I could position my fingers to go up, and that's going to preserve the length. So I'm going to go from here and all the way up. So the beauty of using a scissor on the top and a razor on sides, the razor is going to give us lots of softness on the hair that falls around the perimeter. And then you have really strong, healthy hair that's on top that's going to give us the longevity of the haircut, right? So it's kind of giving us the benefit of both. So the next section, follow the guide that I previously created. And then I'm going to continue in the same manner until I run out of hair to cut. So once I finish this section, I'm going to show you guys my over direction. So I'm going to show you where I'm bringing each hair, each section, in comparison to where it grows. And that will depend on how long your sides are in comparison, let's do this way, in comparison to the top. So if I want the length on the bottom of the section to be either about the same length as the top or just a little bit longer, then I'm going to work on base. So which means the length that I'm creating on this section that I'm about to cut is going to be about the same as the section that I already cut. So which means I need to stay on base, and I'm going to need to bring the section that I'm about to cut back to where it grows from, right? So right here. If I want my length to get longer, I'm going to over direct hair into previous section. So drag the hair up, and that's going to preserve the length towards the bottom. So that will depend on how much over direction, or sorry, how much disconnection you want to see between your sides and the top. So I want to see quite a bit of a severe disconnection that I'm going to use my feather razor to softly connect.
We spoke would like to know if you are using a stationary guide or traveling.
So it is traveling. So stationary guide would be if I over directed hair all the way into the center, right? So this is where I held my first section. Nope, let's come right through here. So this is where I cut my first section, section 2, section 3. That would be stationary guide. I'm cutting my first section here, second, third, fourth. So I'm gradually moving with each section. So which means each section that I'm cutting is getting just a tiny bit longer. Now stationary guide is a thing if I wanted the length that's on the bottom of the section to be much longer. So that's up to you guys. You could do either or, all will work and all will look really pretty. Really just depends on the hair texture and depends on what your client is asking for. So if you want it to be more so like my haircut, all of this is connected and there's a little bit of disconnection in here, which means you follow going around the head and then you over direct that hair forward so that you have that disconnection. So I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side, right? But I already used the razor on this side, which means I have a lot less hair to cut, right? So I already removed some of the length. So all I have to do is cut maybe a section or two, and the rest is not going to reach. So whether you are choosing to use your feather razor first or your scissors first, and the result is going to be very similar, right? As long as you're doing the same elevation over direction. If you're more comfortable using a scissor, you want to leave less work for a feather razor, then use a scissor first, and then just go ahead and clean it up with a scissor. Now, if you want to use a feather razor first because you want it to be more fun, more fun for you, more so than the client, it doesn't really matter for a client, then you could use a feather razor first. All right, so now, here's the side that's been finished, right? So we did the razor on this side, and we did scissors. So I'm gonna go ahead and use a razor on the opposite side and remove the length. So on this side, let's do something a little different. So I will remove the length and I'm gonna connect it to the back, but I'm gonna leave a little bit more length. No, I'm gonna take it back. I'm not gonna do that because I wanna make sure that she can wear it to both sides. And I wanna be able to style it also like a curtain fringe, which I think is really popular now. All right, so I'm going to use the same guide coming from the back, right from here, keeping my blade really open, right, so about 2 inches above my fingers. Careful not to over direct hair, right? So as I'm going with this section, I'm making sure that I'm not over directing hair towards the back. right? So I don't really have enough hair to cut here, right? You guys see how the guide is right underneath. So instead, I'm going to do some surface grazing to blend that. Right, so that's the benefit of using a scissor first. Most of the work that I did was done with a scissor, and the razor is kind of just there to enhance the texture. The other side, most of the work was done with a razor, and the scissor was just there to cut the top a little tiny bit. And the last section, I'm going to do the same thing. Right, so I'm going to go just a tiny bit past the middle to make sure that I'm grabbing every single hair. So applying towards you a little bit more. And then graze. I think she's looking really good. I don't really need much work here. A little heavy right in this spot. Okay, I'm good. So now the last step is going to be to cross-check the balance of this haircut. Right, so normally we do a symmetric haircut and we use the same tools in the same manner. Right, so if I'm going to use a scissor first, I'm going to do that on both sides. If I'm going to use a feather razor first, I'm going to do that on both sides. So this will be a really good test to see how hard it is to create a balanced haircut with doing something imbalanced, right? So I did razor on one side, scissor on the other side. If I bring this hair forward or all the way to the top, I should see a balanced look, but not only balanced, it should look heavy and skinny all evenly. So this is the area that I use the scissor, right? So it's the more blunt area, and I could see my cutting line a little stronger. And then the outsides looks a little more textured, which is even enough. I'm going to take the next section and I'm going to cross-check that and make sure that the bluntness is not too strong and it looks textured even on both sides. So I feel like this side could use a little tiny bit more texture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to peel, but I'm going to place the blade on a diagonal. So I'm going to place the blade and then push it against my fingers to remove a little bit of weight from the surface of the hair. Right, so that's going to create a little more texture on the outside. So that looks good. Next section. All the way through, making sure I didn't miss any hair. A little tiny bit of texture. And then the last little bit. Right now, so I could soften this a little tiny bit more because I know that's going to be in the front. All right, so my haircut is balanced. The length are good. The amount of texture that I created is good. I'm checking to see how it's falling. She looks very sexy. Good. So the last thing I want to do, right? So that is not what I wanted to do. So the last thing I want to do is I want to give her an option to be able to wear her fringe going towards the front like this, right? Which is going to be a little bit shorter than what she has now because I don't think she could see much. I don't think she can walk around like this. All right, so the last step is I'm going to bring all of this hair forward. I'm going to have you move a little to the left. So if a client came in and said, I want to be able to wear my hair only to one side, then you could do the same thing and then keep the area, keep the side that is heavier. So if she wants to wear it to this side, you could keep this side a little bit longer and this is a little bit shorter. If she says, I want to wear my hair on both sides, then you want to keep it pretty symmetric. So you could do shorter to longer and that's going to sweep over from side to side. If she says, I want to be able to wear from side to side and in the middle, then you got to create some short to long, and this way it's going to sweep over to any way possible. So I'm going to section her in the middle. Ask your client to politely not move. I'm going to take a little triangle right in the center. Comb that hair out of the way. push it forward. I'm going to use the tip of her nose as a guide, and I'm going to first remove the weight from the section. So again, surface grazing. I'm going really gentle, really slow, because it's right around her face. I want to make sure that I'm very, very careful, right? So the weight's been removed. Now I'm going to cut it from short to long. So separate right side and left side. Use the tip of her nose, and I'm going to cut this short to long. Use a little bit of the guide from the opposite side. Here's my guide. Short to long. Take the next section. Bring this forward. Whatever reaches is what you're going to cut. So we no longer need to do much of the surface grazing, right? Because the rest has been texturized already. So just the little hairs right over here that's sort of hanging over. And then just cross-check for balance. Make sure everything looks really good. So I think the beauty of a razor is it's nice to first do the really strong theory and then go ahead and let your sort of creative side come out and then find areas that sort of don't work. So right over here, I'm going to go in and soften this line in here just a little tiny bit, just so that she sweeps over a little bit easier. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side. Perfect. Okay, so the next step, let's oh my goodness. Thank you, Pastor Gabes. All right, so the next step is let's do the head sheet. So we have black is going to be our sections. So we took a horizontal section first. Right? We brought it back here. And then we cut it with a razor. This is going to show our over direction. And then elevation, we brought this hair here, next section here, next section a little tiny bit higher, and this was slightly longer, shorter, and shorter. Then the next step is going to be our cutting line for the top. We went parallel to the floor. We brought hair up. Then this is going to show that with each section, we over directed into the previous. Section 1, Section 2, Section 3, and Section 4. And then the last thing we're going to show is that this hair right in here, right, was brought. So that's the same thing. Section 2, Section 3 would be here. 1, 2, and 3. Right, and that was cut with a razor. So gradually from shorter to gradually longer. Okay, so let's do a quick blowout, and then I'll show you guys some finishing touches. I'm going to use a vest brush. So when I'm blow drying, All right, can you guys please tell me if you can hear me? Did you get any yeses? Any yeses?
One yes.
Okay. So perfect. So whenever I'm blow drying, especially for pixies, I always use a wrapping technique, which means I'm going to wrap the hair around the head. So I'm using my brush and the nozzle of the blow dryer to direct the hair as if the head shape is the roller, and I'm rolling the hair around the brush. Rolling the hair around the head. A little trick to get a doll head looking better is if you meld the hair going right flat against the scalp, it doesn't stick out as much. Please don't do that on clients. They might not appreciate that. I'm going all the way around the head. Trying not to create too many sectioning. And I'm crisscrossing from side to side to get as much volume as I possibly can.
I know it's a lot to ask, but would you be able to please show us some dry texturizing techniques from Raymond?
Absolutely. And the beauty of using a feather razor, there's really not much work that needs to be done in the end because it's so soft already. But always leave a little bit of room for customizing, and dry cutting is always a must. Because I think it's nice to kind of create that signature look for your client. Okay, let's do some finishing touches. All right, so on the side that we did a razor on, really not much needs to be done. It already looks pretty blended, right? Because the overall length is a little bit longer and it's softer. Right, so, but the other side where the scissor was touched, it's a little bit heavier. So a couple of different things that I could do. First, I could place my scissor. So this is how we normally hold the scissor. What I could do is instead of holding it here, I could put my thumb from underneath and then push it and then bend my fingers in. So I could do this motion right after I let my scissors. So this motion, and what that will do is I could slide through the hair to create almost like channels that are going to be shorter within, with leaving pretty much the whole entire length. So sometimes we have to do that because the disconnection is quite strong, right? Because I went ahead and used this side as the guide. And that's the longer side, which means the disconnection on this side is quite severe. So going through creates much more connection. Look at that, that's beautiful. It literally removed that sort of bowl looking part. So I'm gonna do a little bit more right in here. So that's my, still my scissor side. Go through. If I feel like that's not enough, what I could do is something a little more aggressive. So I could take a section, I could lift it. So let's do it this way. I can lift it. How is that? And then open and close. And look how much hair I'm removing, right? So careful not to remove the overall length, because the overall length is what you want to keep. You want to keep the disconnection. You just want it to fall really soft, right? So that looks pretty good, and that's pretty blended. So we're gonna do a little tiny bit more right in here. So lift. Maybe go from the side. Okay, so that's a little bit more texturizing. Now if I need to create a little more softness up here, right, if I feel like it's falling a little heavy, what I could do is almost like back combing. So I could take a section, I could lift it, and then I could go ahead and do this motion with the scissors. So I'm going to close it as I'm going closer to the scalp, but don't close it all the way, otherwise you're going to cut a chunk of the hair off. So take a section, open, and slightly close. So you're kind of backcombing the hair, but you don't actually cut much off. You're really just texturizing. So that's really, really soft. I love doing that, especially if you twist it. Never around the crown, because that's where the calyx are. So you can twist it, and then do the same motion. Open and close, open and close, open and close, and that creates shorter and then slightly longer pieces through the middle. All right, so a couple more pieces that we can do a little texturizing on is the fringe area. All right, so that's what she looks like now. Now these are up a little bit. So let's create a little bit more softness right in the center. So I could take middle part, and I could go ahead and do this motion. Right, to really create more openness whenever she wears her hair in the middle. Right, so I could do the same thing, bring it towards the center. The reason why I'm going to bring it towards the center is I want to create more length on the outside, right? Because that was my original goal. So I want to make sure that I'm not getting rid of that. Right in here, I want to point cut a little tiny bit. When you're point cutting, make sure it's only one blade moving, right? So just the still blade, or the still blade is still, the moving blade is moving, and then you will always want to place the blade parallel to the hair. Now a little more right on the outside. Bring it towards the center. And here it is. Look at the difference, right? She's falling so much softer. I'm gonna do the same thing right in this spot, right in here. So first, bring it into the center. Go from underneath, open and close. Don't close it all the way. Next section, bring it towards the center one more time. And then right on the top, I'm going to point cut. And then the last section is just point cutting because it's really not reaching towards the center. So all I'm doing is just putting a little bit more texture right on that highest point. Okay. Let's put a little finishing product in her. So this is just like a dry texture. I'm going to spray some in her hair and mush it around. Put a little bit on my hands. What do you guys think? She's so cute, right? She's ready to go party up on the couch. A little hairspray. All right, guys, so we're almost done. So if you can think of any questions, I would love to hear. So we can spend a little bit of time answering them. If not, I think I did a good job covering. Spritz a little bit more on the outside. Use your fingers to kind of get those pieces to wing out. And then here she is. Let's give her a little tiny bit of a side part. Cute. All right, so here it is. That's what she looks like from the side. In the back. Maybe a little cleaning up right over here with scissor over comb. Wonderful. All right, guys, so what do you think? Any questions? Did I cover everything? You guys know how to reach out if you think of anything. Let's go right back to the head sheet. If you guys want to take a screenshot of this, I know for some of you this is your homework, so this will be a cheat sheet. And hi. Alrighty, well, thank you so much, guys. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. And we love having you. Thank you. All right, bye, guys.